Okay, so why don't we talk about When They See Us, as you mentioned it. This is on Netflix. Matt, do you want to walk us through the sort of the important bits about this, and then we'll
I'll,
talk
I'll,
about what
I'll,
we
I'll
think?
try. I mean, I watched it last night, so it's quite fresh in my mind. This is basically the telling of the Central Park Five case. I believe it goes over 30 years. It's sort of like the 30th
Yeah.
anniversary of this. It's based on an event where a lady jogger was brutally beaten and raped in Central Park, and several youths of colour were arrested for the crimes. This first episode very much looks at how the police bullied statements out of them, so they incriminated other members of the group, other people who were in the vicinity of the time, to
Yeah.
almost get them to admit that they'd committed these crimes, threatening parents with revealing things about their past so they would lose their jobs, things like that. At
Yeah.
the centre of it, you've got the character played by Felicity Huffman, who's very intent on getting these convictions, proving her point about violent sex crimes and things like that. And then I believe as it goes on, we see them grow up and their time in prison and things like that. And I think ultimately they do get is it exonerated? I'm not quite sure of the word, but finally get pardoned, don't they? For because it's found out that somebody else did actually commit that crime.
Spoiler
Um,
alert.
Spoiler alert! If you've only seen the first, it's in the public domain, I
Yes, I
suppose.
know.
Famously, Donald Trump called for the death penalty to be returned, didn't he? For
Yeah, then that
these
comes
five.
up in the second episode.
Oh, does it?
We seem to be living through quite a purple patch for dramas that are brilliant but kind of gut wrenching, don't we?
Yeah.
And this was another example of that. It is absolutely fantastic. Hard to watch at times, isn't it? Those interrogation scenes where you mentioned, I mean, they call them police interviews. They were more like torture scenes, weren't they? They were just kind of beating these forced confessions out of them, and the way that whole families were drawn into it, and people who were barely surviving, parents barely keeping their heads above water, and the police were basically threatening the dads with losing their jobs if their kids didn't sign these false confessions. Just really, really hard to watch, but very compelling. And as you mentioned, Trump there, obviously he comes into the story, and the whole thing feels, horribly relevant to Trump's America, doesn't it?
It's so awful, and yet to think it happened in our lifetime, and it happened in a country that we sort of have such a close relationship to, and we think of, or we did think of until quite recently, as quite moral, is just quite something. But I will say, if I had to pick fault, which I don't like to do because it is a powerful piece of television, I don't know whether it did a good enough job for me to begin with. I didn't really understand why these lads were being picked on outside of the colour of their skin, but I didn't really understand who they were or how they were implicated. When I thought about it afterwards, I'm not sure how much that matters, because the police were just intent on pinning this on somebody, and they fit the profile. So maybe that was the whole point.
I feel like you only really get to know them. There's that final scene where they've sort of implicated each other, but they only meet each other when they're all in that holding cell at the end. And I think that's when you're meant to go, oh, that's that person, that's that person, that's that person. They did very little setup with each character other than saying, this one quite likes baseball, this one plays the trumpet. You get very little setup before they all sort of descend on Central Park, and then you get the aftermath after that.
You said, Paul, that it was powerful. Are you, like me, drawn to these more powerful, sort of grisly, gut-wrenching pieces? Do you think we're doing them better than we've ever done them? I wrote a piece recently about The Virtues and Chernobyl, which are both really difficult to watch, but ultimately incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, you're right. It feels like there's with The Virtues and Chernobyl, and even Years and Years to an extent, that a lot of it is kind of horrific to watch. And I agree with Matt that you need a mix, so it's seasoned with the sort of witty, stylish kind of Killing Eve kind of stuff. But yeah, we do seem to be living through a real purple patch for it at the moment, which is fantastic. And interesting that Felicity Hoffman as well should play the DA prosecutor, because obviously with her there's a kind of unintended resonance about white privilege there, isn't there?
I was thinking the same. Wasn't she's been getting her child into college by certain bribes and things like that, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. I thought a nice touch was when they were running to the park at the beginning. They were playing Public Enemy's Fight the Power, which, of course, famously plays at the start of Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, which is another film about police brutality. And that was released just a few weeks after the events depicted here. So while Spike Lee was putting the finishing touches to that, this was actually going on in the same city. So I thought that was quite a nice little nod.
I would say to an extent, I did find this in places a little bit overwrought. You know, it wasn't a subtle piece. You know, there was bits during the police brutality where the music was very loud. It was sort of telling you how to feel about this to a certain extent, I felt. I almost felt like I was being led, my emotions were being led at times, which I don't think it needed.
Well, it is polemical, but then I guess, you know, you can't blame anyone if this kind of material is written in anger in a way.
Yeah, I think it was mainly the other elements of it. I think if you just had, you know, the interrogations in these rooms, I think that would have worked. I think, you know, there was the other elements, especially the music, I felt was very over dramatic and, you know, serious when he was serious, you know, impending doom and things like that. That was the element that didn't quite work for me, I would say, is the music. But I felt it was sort of beautifully shot as well. I mean, it was filmed by Bradford Young, who has worked with Ava DuVernay before on Selma. I felt it looked really good. I don't know, Paul, have you watched all of it? Have you watched more than the first episode, or?
This is a terrible confession to make. Having watched the first episode, I skipped forward and watched the last episode because I just thought, because knowing the story, I thought I need to see the bit where they're exonerated, and because I know that the 2 hours in between are going to be painful. And so I don't think that particularly reflects well on me, that I couldn't, you know, some of them managed up to 14 years in prison and I couldn't even stay with them for 4 hours. That, you know, I appreciate that doesn't let me in a good light, but I did just kind of need to see that bit where they walk out. So having done that, maybe I go back and brace myself for the whole thing, but I was just like, I skipped to the happy ending. I don't know if that...
I get that too. I do get that. Luke, what about you? Did you watch more than the first one?
I've been watching Chernobyl and The Virtues finished this week, so I couldn't handle this again in the same week, but I will go back to it because it's only 4 episodes and is a powerful story and something I didn't know about. I don't know whether it's... For me, the script wasn't as strong and the characterization wasn't as strong as I'd perhaps hoped for. But maybe that grows in the coming episodes and I'll have to judge that for myself. But When They See Us is all on Netflix now. If you want to, you can binge it all as is the Netflix way.